Okay, so welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. We've got Sally Brett, who's joining us to share her horsemanship experience and some great exercises that you can do with your horses at home. Primarily, if not all, on the ground, so nice and safe exercises that you don't have to get on board, and good basic horsemanship. So, with no further ado, I shall now hand over to Sally. And just one further thing. I will stop at the end and take all the unmute everybody so you can ask questions. So bear with us till the end, and then you can ask questions at the end. So over to you, Sally.
Great, thank you, Julia. So hi there. So my plan is to do a little bit of talking to introduce myself and some of the concepts. And for you guys, there'll be hopefully some pictures for you to look at along the way. And then I've got a couple of videos. One is a nice little video to share with you because it really nicely it shows a concept I'm talking about. And then I also did a little demo earlier in the week with my horse when I knew that I was doing this webinar to be able to show some concepts and some exercises for you guys to play with. So first of all, who am I? I have no idea who's listening to this, so I don't know if some of you guys might know me or not, but my name is Sally Brett and I'm a horsemanship instructor, which basically means that I teach people to train horses, bearing in mind the horse's nature and instincts, which largely are different to ours. And the training can be on the ground or ridden. We mostly start on the ground, but it also is ridden as well. And it looks at the basics of foundation training for safety and communication. And then it builds up to more complex communication that can be used for a variety of disciplines. So it's really a foundation kind of training. Let's move on. So my background is in science. I did an animal science degree at Aberystwyth University, and my first profession was actually in the equine nutrition industry. But I've always been fascinated by equine behaviour, and I studied this in my spare time. And I started studying it through the Pirelli Natural Horsemanship Programme. And then I actually made a career change and I became a working pupil for a high-level Pirelli instructor in the UK. And then over a couple of years, I spent a total of 6 months studying horsemanship in America. And then I became an instructor through their programme. I've since become independent, so I don't teach under a particular brand. And I've also trained and ridden with quite a few different horsemanship specialists. I really think it's important to keep progressing and to keep kind of my own personal development, my own horsemanship. So I've ridden with Buck Brannaman, Martin Black, Karen Rolfe of Dressage Naturally. Some of you might have come across her on Facebook. Luis Lucio, who coaches the Spanish Olympic dressage team. And I try and spend about a month each year riding and training with an Australian gentleman horsemanship coach called David Stewart. And at the moment, I'm mostly teaching in the UK, private and shared lessons, and also courses like the ones run by Julia, If Your Horse Is Your Mirror. But I've previously been lucky enough to teach quite a few kind of more far-flung places, such as America, Australia, and also in the Middle East. So why do I feel horsemanship's important? Well, really, I've always been interested in training horses and horse behaviour. And early on, I realised that horses didn't always behave exactly how humans wanted them to. And I came to realise this was due to their nature. They're herd animals, they're herbivores, they're prey animals, they're claustrophobic by nature. They have flight as their main means of defence. And they have quite a few different motivations and instincts to humans who we're predators by nature, which can be a bit kind of strange to think about, but that's kind of our nature and how we're set up. And then when I started to look at things from their point of view and start to understand their behaviours better and improve my communication and ability to train them because of that. And I believe that horses that are educated and understand their handlers and riders are much safer to be around and more fun as well. And, you know, whether it's just to be safe handling horses on the ground, or whether you want to have a reliable hacking partner or, you know, an educated competition horse, to me, the foundations are all the same. So there's a few different concepts and exercises I'm going to share with you in the little video that I've done with my own horse. And the main concepts really are that horses learn when they get a release or when they get comfort. So pressure can motivate a behaviour, but really it's the release that teaches them. And this can apply to many things. So an example is getting a horse confident with things, and there's some examples here on the picture, you know, things like fly spray, injections, handling legs, getting them confident, jumping over jumps, going through water, trailer loading. There's lots of things that horses by nature are quite kind of worried about. And to get a horse confident, the best thing to do is break the stimulus or the task into lots of really small stages. When they get worried, to retreat back to smaller stages, and then to quit when a horse is confident rather than pushing to achieve the task in one go. And it's actually the moment you quit that's important. And there's a little video I'm going to show you that really kind of illustrates it really well. But they'll generally be more fearful next time. But if you quit when they're confident, and to help them be confident, you might have to backtrack a bit or retreat to a smaller stimulus to help them get confident. But you quit on confidence, they'll actually be more confident next time. And the little video I'm about to show you, it's actually from a Vet Record Facebook page, but it's a really nice example of what I've been describing. And the vet uses approach and retreat for vaccinating a horse. And hopefully you'll be able to see what the horse's behaviour starts like and how it ends, and how she's able to do a really nice job of being able to vaccinate a horse that possibly, if she'd just gone in and tried to vaccinate it straight away, would have actually been quite tricky or even dangerous. So I shall play that now for you.
Oh, very clever indeed. Oh, very clever indeed. Oh, very silly sausage.
So I think that was just a really nice example of how to get a horse confident with something. And you'll have hopefully noticed how she had little quits every time the horse changed the behaviour and got a bit more confident. She quit and then she started again. So that's one example. Another example of being able to kind of quit at the right time is if you want a horse to yield. So if you want a horse to yield away from pressure for movement. So an example might be using a halter to back a horse up, getting a horse to move away from your leg in a lateral manoeuvre or going forward, having a horse understand to yield to pressure when they're tied up, asking your horse to yield and slow down when you put some pressure on the reins. Basically, pressure motivates the behaviour, but it's the release that teaches, and it's also the timing of your release that's important. So pressure without well-timed release can actually just make a horse either confused or dull, or sometimes both. So being able to put pressure on slowly and then releasing when you get the right response is really important. And I'll be demoing that in more detail in the little kind of demo I videoed for you. And then there's also helping to dissuade behaviours that maybe you don't want. So things like if a horse is pushy or biting, if you create discomfort when the horse is doing the undesirable behaviour, and then allowing them to be comfortable when they're not doing it, it helps them to choose the behaviours that are more comfortable for them and more desirable for you. And again, there's a better example of this in the little demo. So I shall stop talking now, although there'll be me talking again in a minute with my horse, but I'll play the little video. It's about half an hour long, and then if you've got any questions at the end, feel free to ask. So I shall put that on now for you.
So let me introduce my demo partner first of all. This is Taylor. He is my horse. He's a New Forest Pony Cross Thoroughbred. He's about 15-1 and he's going to be 8 years old this year, and I've had him since he was 2.5. So he's going to be showing some of these horsemanship exercises to you. And what I wanted to mention before I start is really some of the things I show you. Please, you know your horse better than anyone else. Just make sure that any of the exercises you choose to do are suitable and safe for you and your horse. So yeah, just use your own judgment on that. Make sure you stay safe. So I thought I'd introduce some of the equipment that you'll commonly see with horsemanship and the equipment I like to use. This is a rope halter. It's just a simple rope halter. It doesn't have any leverage on it, and it ties up with a little knot on the side. You'll see here. And the reason I like to use a halter like this is it's nice and light and comfortable to wear, but it's uncomfortable to lean on. I want to talk about the principles of kind of comfort and discomfort with training horses. But it means a horse is less likely to lean onto this sort of halter compared to one that's really nice and thick and wide. That often encourages a horse to lean on it because it's comfortable to do so. This is uncomfortable to lean on, so you're less likely to get that behaviour. The lead rope is longer than your average lead rope. This one is 12 foot long. Most lead ropes are 6 foot long. And this is a slightly heavier grade of lead rope. Again, it's more of a communication tool. It's longer, so if he needs to move his feet, it's got a little bit more drift. It also is a heavier grade of rope so that there is a little bit more communication. He can feel when I lift up on the lead rope compared to other lead ropes that are kind of a lighter grade. So, one of the things I want to talk about first of all is about how to get your horse's confidence with things. So one of the things might be confidence with your lead rope. So for some horses, rubbing them with a lead rope or throwing the lead rope over, like with him, he's quite confident with this. It's something I've done right from the beginning, but for some horses they could be quite worried by this. That also means they could be quite worried by you moving in the saddle, if you're over the when you're sitting, moving your arms around, if you're riding. So it's a good thing to be able to get your horse used to. And how you get them used to that is by using approach and retreat. So if my horse was worried by this sort of action, I would do less. So I'd go back and I'd retreat and do this sort of action and see if he could cope with that. If he couldn't cope with that, I might just see, could I rub him first of all with the hand without the rope and just hold the rope in my other hand. When he gets confident, when I see him lower his head, slow his breathing, start blinking, maybe licking and chewing, then I would quit, because whatever I quit on, I'm going to get more of. So I want to quit on confidence. And then I'd start whatever he could cope with, and then I would go through the stages until I noticed him get worried. And if I noticed him get worried, which he isn't, but if I saw some signs of him getting worried, him starting to go starey with his eyes, lift his head and neck, start moving around, I would retreat back to a previous stage. And I wouldn't quit if he got worried, because if I quit when he gets worried and moves, he'll think the answer is to get me to stop is to get worried and move away. So I don't quit, but I just go back to a stimulus he can cope with, and when he's able to relax, then I would quit. So again, I'm quitting on relaxation. I quit on whatever I want to have more of. Now, being able to quit on what you want also applies to asking for movement. So if I want him to yield to pressure and to move, an example might be backing up off the halter, I'm going to hold the halter under his chin and I'm going to ask him to move backwards. He'll feel it on the front of his nose here. Now, something that's quite typical of us humans, well, two things really. One is we push at whatever pressure we think we're going to need, which is normally a lot firmer than we want them to be. And if we want a horse to be light, we need to offer lightness. The other thing we do is we keep pressing until we get the certain number of steps we want. So if I want my horse to be light, I need to offer him lightness. I'd love him to go off just the feel of my finger. And then I slowly increase the feel. And then when he backs up, I release. So he gets a release for doing the correct behaviour. If I want another step, I start again. I start light, increase, then I release. And it's important to be able to do these exercises both sides, for us and for the horse. So I start nice and light, I gradually increase, and I release. So that's going to be our basic principle. Make sure you release as you get the behaviour you want, and that you start light and gradually increase the pressure. Don't just go in there with the pressure that you think you're going to need. Especially when you're teaching, it's really important to go slowly up through your stages of pressure. Don't just start kind of dragging them backwards. I want him to move his own feet, not me to be shoving his feet backwards. Now, something he's not doing, but that some of you might have a problem with doing, is if you go in to stand next to your horse, or you go to hold them, that they might start trying to nibble on you or push on you. And what we might do for that is what's called a block. So what I'm going to do is get my little helper to come on in. So what Tom's going to do is just pretend to be a horse, so that he's going to try and kind of nibble my elbow or that sort of thing with, with his hand, as though he was a horse. So, and what we often do is go, oh, don't do that, and hit the horse. And then often we'll make them head shy or make them worried, or they'll start coming back in. So instead, if he goes to do that, I'm just going to create a little bit of energy that just makes it uncomfortable for that behaviour. So I'm almost saying, sure, put your nose there, but if you do put your nose there, it's going to get that. Another way you could do it is you could use the end of your rope, and you could just put the end of your rope there. And again, it's a little bit like an electric fence. If he stays away from that area, his nose doesn't get tapped. But if he's silly enough to put his nose there, his nose will get tapped. And so some of you might need to use that, and eventually they start to make their own decision and go, do you know what, it's just uncomfortable to have my nose there, I'm not going to put it there anymore. So it doesn't really matter, you can use any sort of rhythm, but it's better to keep the rhythm going rather than just do one. And notice how I'm not directing it at the horse, I'm just protecting my own personal space. Okay, thanks Tom. So some of you might need blocks for that. So, thinking about using steadied pressure to ask my horse to move around, there are a few different versions I could use. Back up off the nose is one. From the halter, you could also do it with your hand. Now, some horses find this a little bit more personal, so it's often easier to start off using your halter or your head collar. But another one is being able to do it from my hand, put my fingers either side, and again I start nice and light, gradually increase. And then when he backs up, I release. Start nice and light, gradually increase, release. Start nice and light, gradually increase, release. Another little exercise you can do is being able to move the hindquarters over. Now, I could just come here and start applying pressure and ask him to move over. But for some of you, that might put yourself in a bit of a dangerous position, because you're in the kick zone now. And if I appear to the horse to be a little bit irritating, quite rightly so, they could lift up a leg and say, you're a bit like a fly, go away. So to put myself in a better position, if I ask for a little bit of lateral flexion, so I ask for him to bend his nose slightly, I'm going to rub him first of all. If I've got a particularly sensitive horse, I might rub from the withers down to here. And then I'm going to start nice and light, gradually increase the pressure, and then when he steps over, I release. I also want to check I can go back in and rub the same area afterwards. So let me just move him round so you can see that again. So I'll get a little bit of flexion. So that means if he did kick out, the kick's going to go away from me. Good boy. Can I rub the area first of all? Then can I start nice and light? And then as he steps over, I release. And then can I just go back and rub him again? And of course you'd want to be able to do that both sides. So could I also move the front end round? So I'm going to do this holding onto my halter and touching my horse's shoulder, and I'm looking for him to move around as though his tail was the middle of a clock and his body was the hand of a clock, and he's going to be moving around. If this was 12 o'clock, could he move around to 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock? So I'm going to think about how my body is. I want to turn it at the angle I want him to move. I give him a little rub on his shoulder. I don't just come in and start poking him. Start nice and light, just my fingertips. Gradually increase the pressure. And ideally I'd like him flexed in his direction of travel. Start nice and light. Slowly increase the pressure and have him step around. Good boy. Okay. Another exercise you can play with, which is a nice one to do, is being able to lower your horse's head. Again, I'm not just going to try and pull his head down. I'm going to start nice and light, so he's going to feel it on his poll, on the halter. As he puts his head down there, I release. I start light, gradually increase, and I release. Okay? You can also do it with your hands here, but some horses find this a little bit more personal. So often it's good to be able to support them with the halter. So I'll start with my hand on his poll, and I'll start with light pressure, gradually increase it. But then if I get to the point where I'm having to put more than a fair amount of pressure, I'll add in the halter to be able to help him. And then I'll release as soon as he lowers his head. Give him a little rub. If I want it to be lower, I'll start again. Start light, gradually increase. And then as he lowers his head, I'll release. Good boy. So another thing to play around with, and I'll get a stick to be able to support this one. Is being able to ask your horse to go forward off a feel. Now what you'd like is that you could just lead your horse forward and they would come forward off that feel. And like he understands it, so he'll be able to do that for me. But if you have a horse that you offer them a feel and they don't come with you, you don't want to try and drag them forward. So you might use a stick. I prefer a stiff stick because it's a bit slower. The message comes a bit slower to the horse. But something like a schooling whip would be absolutely fine as well. And then if your horse didn't come forward, what you would do, of course he will now, but I'd offer him a feel, give him a little bit of time to think about it, and then I would put some energy in the air above him and then gradually touch him lightly and then tap him. And then as soon as he comes forward, of course I'd release. I wouldn't keep tapping. I don't need to do it with him because he understands to come forward and backwards off that feel. Okay. So now I've got some of the basics going. If I want more than one step, again, I have to be careful that I don't end up just keep pushing my horse, because that's our nature. We keep pushing until we get the certain number of steps we want, and then we would think, oh, we need to release. But what will often happen is the horse will get dull with that because there isn't any release for each step. And I want to be thinking about talking to his feet ideally. So, for example, if I wanted to back up and I wanted, say, 5 steps, I would start light, gradually increase, soften, start light, release, start light, release, start light, release, start light, release. And then when I have the number of steps I want, then I would quit. So you notice I didn't just hold on to him and keep pushing backwards until I got the number of steps and then release at the end. There's a little mini release. To him, it feels like I've completely released. I haven't let go completely, but to him, all the pressure is gone. I've gone soft. And then the pressure I start at is nice and light, because if I want a horse to be light, I have to offer them lightness. Horses don't naturally become light if you just shove them around. You need to start light and then go through your stages or increments of pressure. And horses learn from stages of pressure until they'll learn how to be lighter. So that would also apply if I wanted to move his front end round. So if I wanted him to move all the way around, I'd start light, do a little softening, ask again, soften, 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 ask again, soften. Good boy. And of course he understands he needs to be light. That's what I've trained him to be. But it's important he still has a release that he moves into a release, he doesn't move into more pressure, so that he's motivated to be light because it feels more comfortable when he's light. So, another little exercise to be able to play with, and this is a nice one that builds up to ridden exercises as well, is your horse being able to be soft laterally. I mean side to side. So this is also important if you lead your horse and they tend to turn away from you, or when you ask them to turn their nose with the halter or the bridle, that they go the opposite way. So when my horse feels the halter on the side of his face or the bridle, I want him to yield to it and not brace or wear still, push the other way. So I'm going to stand back towards where the saddle is. I offer him a feel out to the side of his face, and when he follows that feel, I release. Notice I'm not here blocking him. I'm back and I'm using my hand. If I was riding, it makes sense to use this hand. That would be the hand that I would use if it was down a rein. It comes out to the side, it doesn't come back. Again, I start light, slowly close my fingers. When I feel him respond to that, I'll release. Now, if I want more flexion, I don't just keep pulling him around, I'll ask for a bit more. And I'll release. And I'll start light, gradually increase, and I'll release when he comes round. Release, release. There you go, and he's woken up a little bit, so good boy. Okay. You notice again, he came all the way around, but I didn't pull him round. I requested and he came round because he knew he would seek a release for coming round. So when you've got that going for you, and your lateral flexion, they can keep their feet still. Now some horses might want to stay braced, and so when their nose comes round, their bum flips. Don't worry about that, just stay with them and wait until, let's say I cause it to happen. I would just keep moving with my horse, and as soon as his feet are still, and he has a little bit of flexion, I'd release. So I let him know that's the right thing. If I release when he moves his feet, he'll think, oh, that's what she wants. Whenever I move my feet, she releases. Then I'll just keep getting that. So I don't release, I just quietly keep moving with him. Don't add anything extra in, but I wait for his feet to be still and to have flexion, and then I'd release. So once I can consistently get my lateral flexion good, then I can also see if I can lift up on my lead rope, step back towards his hip, and could I get him to step round. I'm looking for that inside hind to step forward and through. Obviously I want to be able to do it on both sides. Get my lateral flexion first, then I step back towards his hip, lift up, and that inside hind steps forward and through. If I notice him stepping here or here, that means he's braced through his ribs. And so I just wait, make sure I've got flexion, make sure I'm back towards his hip, and when he steps forward and through, as I want him to, then I would release. So when you've got some of these exercises going for you, then you could start using it to a little bit of purpose. So a mounting block is a good one to be able to play around with. So if I've got a horse that follows a feel, I can lead him and be able to have him line up and get him used to resting next to the mounting block. Again, wherever they get comfort, that's where they like to be. So if he just gets to hang out here, he'll start to think this is a nice place to be. Then I can practice my back up. Ask him to come through, lift up for that hind leg to step round, lead him forward. Good boy. And have him rest the other side as well. For those of you that do trek, or just because you want to be equal sided. It's good to be able to have your horse happy to be able to mount and dismounted both sides. So this is a good place to be able to practice. If you have a horse that likes to swing their bum away, let me just kind of cause that to happen. Rather than me have to get off the mounting block, I could just make a little game of it and get him to move himself back to being next to me again, rather than me have to get off the mounting block, move the mounting block, get back on again. Good boy. I also think it's useful for being able to do gaits. So if I want to be able to go through a gate, if it's narrow or muddy or lots of different reasons why I might want to stay next to the gate and hold the gate open if it's windy and put my back against the gate. In this instance, that's not the case with this gate, but I can be able to draw my horse through, lift up, and have his hindquarters swing away from me. Then I can manage the gate, equally going back the other way, have him lead through, lift up, get those hind legs to step round so he's facing me, be able to back him up. So there's lots of practical applications once you've got some of these things going for you and your horse is nice and soft and understands the yields. Then there's lots of practical applications. So some fun little exercises to have a little play around with are being able to see how accurate you are with your ability to ask your horse to go forward and back. So some of you might just be starting with the basics of getting your horse light going forward and back. Then you can play around with a number of steps. So I might see if I can do 5 forward. So I might go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 5 back. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then I might go 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2. 1, 2. 1. 1. Good boy. So you can start to have fun with being able to talk to your horse's feet and be able to see if you can control those feet, because if you control where their feet are, you can control where their body is. So something I didn't mention earlier, and I meant to, is about straightness in your backup. And some people find it difficult to have a horse be straight, and doing it alongside the fence can be really useful, but then often when you take the fence away, the horse goes wonky again. So when a horse backs up, their head and neck are a little bit like a rudder, in that if I keep his head and neck straight, his hindquarters are likely to steer straight, but if I ask his nose to go off to the side, you can see his hindquarters go off. If I bring his nose back this way, his hindquarters go off the other way. So if you just want to keep straight, and this is the same for ridden as well, if you can keep the head and neck straight, or if you notice the hindquarters go off in a particular direction, you can straighten the horse. So if I notice that his bum was coming off this way, I could then straighten him by bringing his nose slightly towards me. And then of course you could play around with backing through a weave or that sort of thing, being able to steer your horse. Now he's very light to back up, but I still make sure there's a little softening in my fingers for each stride. so that he's motivated to be able to back up for me. So another little exercise you could play around with is being able to think about straddling a pole. So for some horses, they can be quite confident with poles. Others are less confident. So if you have an unconfident horse, you might just get them used to resting near a pole. If they can cope with that, then could they rest straddling a pole? Now, if your horse struggles to stand like that and needs to shoot off, don't try and hold them there. Because they can't, because they're unconfident. Just use approach and retreat. Let them retreat, let them come away from it, and let them reapproach. So when your horse is pretty confident with that, then you can start playing around with, could you just get one foot over the pole? And for those of you that have been playing around with this sort of thing for a little while, you can then choose the foot. So I might decide I'd like to be able to have Taylor's left foot. So this one on this side. So then I get to play around with, good boy. Where do I need his balance and his weight and his flexion to be able to talk to that foot? So then could I be able to put that one back? And then could I get the right one to come forward? Could I be able to put it back? And then be able to talk to the left one? And sometimes it might be a fluke you get it, but the more you play with it, the more you'll be able to set your horse up that you can communicate with the particular foot you want to communicate with. So it's a fun thing to be able to play with. You can also do it with the hind feet as well. And then this is a little exercise that's become, I've seen on Facebook, it's become quite popular. But from a horsemanship point of view, being able to straddle a pole lengthways, again, you can learn a lot about how to place your horse's feet. So if you know about flexion, and about balance, and your horse is responsive, you can be able to ask them to straddle a pole. Then you can also play around with placing the feet backwards. Placing the feet forwards. I'm thinking about each individual foot and where I want to place it. Then I might play around with, could I bring front feet over? And then what would it take to be able to have him walk forward with hind feet straddling it and front feet one side? Then it comes more about precision and placing the feet than about it being a trick. Good boy. And you can do any variation of those things. Again, just really as a fun little exercise to play with, but that you can also start to help your horse get lighter and more responsive, but also can you think about placing the feet? which I think, although it's useful on the ground and it helps with communication safety, also makes a much nicer riding horse to be able to feel their feet and be able to know where they are and be able to place their feet as well. So hopefully you found these little exercises interesting, and some of them you might want to go away and have a little play with. As I say, for some of you, if you're just starting out, just some of the earlier exercises. But if you've been playing with horsemanship for a little while, some of these slightly more challenging exercises will be fun to play around with. Okay, thanks.
So hopefully you enjoyed that little demo. And obviously it was mostly aimed at, well, it was all aimed at groundwork. Obviously the current situation, I know many people are spending more time on the ground at the moment, but hopefully you'll also see how this kind of groundwork is also a stepping stone to having a horse have a good understanding of a rider and be light and responsive under saddle as well. So thanks for watching, and I'll pass over to Julia now.
Thanks, Sally. I will if I take myself off mute. Okay, so what I'm going to do is take everybody off mute and see. There we go. See if anybody has got any questions. So I'll open the floor up and make sure everybody's off mute.
Talk just at the right time, you do.
Okay, so everybody's microphone's off now. So has anybody got any questions or any thoughts on what Sally just shared with us?
I have. It's Cindy. Hi, Sally. Hi, Julia. So I've got a little hard nut 2.5-year-old that has got no respect for his head rope, which is the same as you're using, a Pirelli head collar. I'll watch him tied up and he will literally back up and pull until he snaps whatever he's tied up to. And he can be the same when I'm trying to do some work with him. Have you got any suggestions?
Yeah, so taking it right back to basics. So one of the little exercises you saw me do on the fence early on, where I asked the horse to follow a field forward, and then if they didn't come forward, I added in the stick to be able to have them come forward off a field.
Okay, yeah.
That would be a real basic thing to be able to have them come forward, especially for the tying up, because if they don't understand how to follow a field forward. Now, the unfortunate thing is when they pull and break the string, well, that's obviously useful because it means they don't hurt themselves and break their neck, which is very important. What it also does is it means they get a release from pulling back. So it actually teaches them to pull back.
Yeah.
So for a young horse, I tend not to tie a horse. I tend to have a long rope and run it through a ring so that I keep hold of the rope. So if the horse starts pulling back, I'm actually can control it and allow a bit of drift. I don't give them a release until they start stepping forward. And if they didn't come forward towards the ring, I would then add in some rhythm behind them with a stick or something so they came forward, and then of course they'd get their own release.
Okay.
The challenge with tying them when they're not trained to tie and come off a field is that they will do exactly what you've described. They'll either panic and pull back and snap the string, or they'll learn just to pull back and snap it. But every time they do that, they in fact get a reinforcement for that behaviour because they got a release for it. So my suggestion would be, for now, I wouldn't tie him up. I would have him, hopefully you understand what I'm describing, but it's a metal ring, the rope goes from the halter through the ring and then back to your hand.
Yeah, just as
you can groom him and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But if he goes to pull back, you allow a little bit of drift, don't hold him tight. You might need to move his feet a bit, but then wait for him to stop. And if he doesn't stop, or if he's just pulling on it, then come behind him and add a little bit of rhythm. And as soon as he comes forward off that field towards the wall, then you would release. And that should help him.
Okay.
When they've learned a pattern, it's always more difficult. They can't unlearn a pattern, but you can put new ones in place.
Yeah,
so it might be something that will be there for a little while until you've got that new pattern in place for him to come forward off the field.
Yeah, he's only done it a few times when he's been tied up, and I must admit I've not had a stick at hand, so the reinforcement from the rear. That's really helpful. Thank you.
And I wouldn't hard tie him for now. I'd have him through a rope, through a ring. And then another tool that can be really useful as an interim before you tie them is something called a blocker tie or a idolo tie. Both of those work on the principle of friction. So the rope runs through this little tie, and so the horse, if they pull back, the rope pulls through a little bit, but they're not hard tied, so they don't have that pull back and then ping.
Okay.
So that's maybe something to look into as well. But if they're a hard case where they just like to keep pulling, they'll just keep pulling it through that friction tie and just pull off loose. So you need to have the training in place first.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
I've just put the blocker tie ring on the screen if you want to have a look what it looks like.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thanks, Julia.
Thank you. Thanks, Jackie. Anyone else got any questions?
Yeah, could I ask a question, please? You mentioned in the video when you were doing a couple of the exercises, you mentioned that you lift the arm up. You said to lift up to bring the rope up. I'm relatively new to this, so what is that actually for? What are you telling the horse at that stage? Are you stopping it, or?
It depends on the action. So if the horse already has some lateral flexion, they're already bent around, and you lift the lead rope up kind of towards their hip or towards the back of the saddle, the imaginary saddle, that action actually causes the inside hind to step over. It's known as an indirect rein, but it's a dynamic that helps the hind leg step over. So in that instance, if a horse is already flexed, and then I lift up towards the hip, it'll get that inside hind leg to step over. So I did it as a basic exercise, but then you'll also have seen it in play, if you like, when I did the mounting block exercise.
Yeah.
And when I asked him to go through the gate, they have to have some flexion. If they're straight and you lift up, it probably won't get the hind leg to step round. So it's quite important you have kind of the ingredients, the basics that I went through early on first, and then when you put it into kind of a more practical scenario, they'll understand to follow a feel and have a bit of flexion when they feel the halter on the side of their face.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thanks, Sue. Good question.
Thanks, Julia.
Okay, so whilst I'll get us to pause for a little bit, and if anybody's thinking of any other questions, so
I've got a question.
go on, go ahead.
I could ask thousands of questions. I have what I would call a rather challenging young horse, and he likes to use his head as a battering ram. So I've seen quite a bit of in-hand work with him. But for example, if you try and run with him at the trot, all he tries to do is bite you and batter you with his head. When you get on a mounting block, he will try and knock you back off it. His head is better than he was, but I've put a grazing muzzle on him now to stop him biting you when you're doing hand work with him, because there's nothing seems to be stopping him. And he's like 1 step forward and 5 steps back with him.
Yeah, so the earlier exercise that you saw when I got my partner Tom to come in, now basically being able to block the horse. So with horses, often we don't notice if there's a little nudge or a little kind of step into our space. We don't do much about it because it doesn't feel like a threat. But then if it moves up to being bitten, then we suddenly go, what the devil's going on? The more you can notice the small things when they step into your space, or he turns his nose into you if there wasn't an invite, or him just kind of nuzzling at you slightly, well, often we think, oh, that's kind of cute. If we yield to that, that's often them just testing the water to see whether we are pushable on. So the more you can notice the small things and be able to create blocks using your elbow, using the end of your rope. You can equally use a stick, so you can hold a stick between you and your horse. And again, the idea isn't, the stick's there to hit the horse. It's there to create a little bit of energy in your personal space. But if the horse is silly enough to come in without an invite, it'll be uncomfortable for them. And then they start to make better.
Right, because I say the grazing muzzle's purely for safety, because if you put him into trot, then even when you work him in walk, his teeth will just come at you, and even if you try and block him, he's just so quick. So I've put that on him, and that's stopping him a lot, although he tries to rub it off. And I tend to carry a stick with him now, and if he comes into the space, then he'll usually hit the stick with his nose to keep him out, but it just seems to be a really, really long struggle with him.
Yeah, and some of them are naturally more dominant than others. Some are just, you know, that's just kind of the way they are, a little bit like people. We're all a bit different. Some horses are naturally just continuously trying to see whether we are, you know, who's who in the hierarchy, if you like. And it sounds like he's one that is quite persistent with that, especially when they're young as well. It doesn't always change as they get older, but with a youngster, that's often they're going to ask more questions. So the key is really being consistent and trying to notice small infringes into your personal space and doing something about it then, rather than only noticing the big infringes, like when he's whacking you or
when you push it,
biting you.
pushes you off the mountain block, or yes, I'll keep at it, thank you.
But yeah, but I mean, if the muzzle's working for you, that's probably sensible at the moment to keep that on and to keep yourself safe.
Yes.
Thanks, Jackie and Sally. So I just wanted to share with you my website page, and just to encourage you, if you want to keep up to date with these free webinars that we're doing with our guest speakers, and also the map reading sessions that I'm continuing to do once a month. Normally it's just through the winter, but in these different circumstances, I'm continuing until things change. So if you subscribe to the newsletter here, you'll get information about new events and the free webinars and anything else. You can unsubscribe anytime, and I don't bombard you with lots of stuff. They are quite minimal. I'll also share with you Sally's website, because I think you can sign up on your website too. Oh,
Yes, I believe you can.
There you go. I had a look earlier, and
my contact details are on there. My email address.
Yeah, so
well.
you can sign up to Sally's mailing list here, and contact details are here. I sound like an air. There we go. Yeah, so that's Sally's website, and Sally's on. You can find Sally on Facebook as well under Everyday Horsemanship. If you've got any problems getting hold of registering on there, just drop myself or Sally at info@everydayhorsemanship.co.uk, and I'm sure either of us will get back to you. Sally is booked for a number of training events later in the year. I'll work backwards from September at Sunker Park, and June we've got 2 events booked, but they're probably not going to go ahead, being realistic. But I'm hoping maybe by September that we'll be able to go ahead. Oh, and October at Brandy House, haven't we? We've got 2. Yeah, so there are 2 events if you are interested in working more with Sally later in the year. Oh, I just realised I was talking about a screen and I wasn't sharing it. There you go. There's Sally's website and details.
I'll stop sharing mine, Julia.
Yeah. Okay. Hopefully everyone can see that one. Everyday Horsemanship, you'll find it quite easily, and there's Your Horse Is Your Mirror with the subscribe button just there. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. And the other thing we have on Your Horse Is Your Mirror, we have the Learning Zone, which is a subscription part of the site, where we hold lots of training, particularly for track, but also for confidence and goal setting. And you can find all the replays for all the training that we do. This one is going to be available on my YouTube channel, and I'll send you all an email with the details. But this one is available to everyone. But some of the training ones are subscription only. So it's there on the Learning Zone. If you just click on there and sign up and follow the instructions. So, any more questions for Sally before we wrap up the evening?
I have one, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure, Jenny, go ahead.
Just a quick one. I've been doing some groundwork with my young horse, and I'm lucky enough to have an arena, but I'm finding that in the arena he gets very distracted. So whilst I try to stop him getting distracted by giving him something else to do, backing him up, I just feel like I never get through an actual task, so to speak, because I'm just constantly trying to get his attention back. Have you got any tips to help me get him a bit more focused?
Often the more you can think about their feet, the better. If you can be thinking about directing their feet within whatever task you're doing, often we think a little bit more about getting their body to back up, or getting their body to move sideways along a pole, or get their body to go around us in a circle, or whatever task it is. Think about placing his feet and trying to get the message down to the feet, and that will often get their mind with you. That exercise with the forward and back, counting the number of steps, it doesn't really matter how many steps you do, but that's quite a nice one, because it causes the human to get more thinking about the feet rather than just backing them up, bringing them forward, backing them up. So that's a nice one. And the more you can get your horse to think to the feet, the more you've got their mind.
Cool.
Great question, Jenny. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
Yeah, hi, can I ask one? It's Jackie here with Buck.
Hi, Jackie.
Hi. Sally, with Buck, I mean, you know him a little bit. He tends to get quite bored when I'm doing groundwork with him. I do try and mix it up with him a bit, but have you got any suggestions on how to sort of keep him engaged?
Yeah, again, almost similar to the previous question, think more about where you have tasks that you're thinking more about his feet, because then it becomes precision and more interesting. I don't know if you noticed with my horse, but for the first kind of 3/4 of the demo, he was half asleep. You know, it was boring to him. But when I started to play around with the forward and backwards, with counting the number of strides forward and backwards, and then when we started looking at the pole and I started to choose which foot I wanted, and then getting him to straddle a pole and forwards and backwards, and then making it more difficult for him, the more precision that's involved, often the more they'll be engaged in it. If it's just repetition of stuff they've done before, the first couple of times you do something they're interested in, and then they go, oh, here we are again. A little bit like with children, if you keep them just doing the ABCs, you know, it's interesting for the first couple of lessons, but then they get bored, so you need to cause it to be a little bit more thought-provoking. It doesn't have to be fast and wild and woolly, you know, I didn't get out and walk the whole time, but the more you can have precision with things and be particular, that can help them be more engaged.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Excellent. Thank you, Jackie. So a huge thank you to Sally. I know you've put an awful lot of work in preparation for this and demo with your horse, but I think actually seeing Sally with her horse is, even though her horse is very well trained, I think being able to see what's being described makes it a lot easier to understand. So that is brilliant. So I do record the webinars, so I'll be uploading them to YouTube later in the week. I'm hoping that the video, because the video was a little bit jerky, and I don't know whether it was just my bandwidth on my broadband or not, but if not, I might ask Sally to, if you've got the original, we might just need to share that if it's a problem. But thank you everybody for taking part. I hope you all got your clapping for Boris and the NHS at 8 o'clock. And we'll look out for the upcoming dates. We've got a map reading webinar next on the 23rd of April, and then dates to be speakers to be confirmed for May onwards, depending on what goes on with the country and the world. So thank you very much, everybody.